I am a public information officer at the International Labour Organization, and today we'll be discussing the Youth Employment Challenge. So firstly, I would like to introduce two experts on the topic. Beside me, I have Dorothea Schmidt-Klau, the head of the Management and Coordination Unit of the Employment Policy Department of the International Labour Organization. We also have Felix Weindekopf, Youth Employment Technical Officer at the Employment Policy Department of the International Labour Organization. Thank you for joining us. I would also like to welcome the audience and encourage the audience to send questions throughout this Facebook Live. Thank you. So, on the topic, there are 66 million unemployed young people worldwide, and there are further 145 million young people who are employed. They have jobs, but they're still living in poverty. So this is a big issue. Those are big numbers, and that's something that we'll be discussing today. And we'll also be discussing the work of the ILO and what the ILO is doing to help this. Firstly, my first question for you, Dorothea. What are the major challenges facing youth today who are entering the workforce?
Well, there are so many challenges, and two of the most important ones you already mentioned. First of all, young people find it much more difficult to actually find jobs. They very often stay in unemployment, and the longer they stay in unemployment, the more difficult it becomes for them to actually enter the labor market. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. Many young people, as you said, are working, but they still live with their families in poverty. They cannot lift themselves out of poverty, which again means a very bad start for a career development. On top of that, most of these young people, they don't have any rights at work. They work under very difficult contractual circumstances. They are very, very vulnerable. Very often they have absolutely no protection whatsoever. They have no voice at work, so they have nothing of what we would call a decent job.
Okay, so I have another question for you. So you mentioned that they are a particularly vulnerable group. Could you let us know how they compare young people to the rest of the population?
Well, let me just go back to the unemployment rates. Young people are roughly 3 times more likely to be unemployed than adults. 3 times, that's a huge number. And there are regions where it's actually up to 10 times. So this already is a huge, huge difference. And in every single other indicator, like working and still living in poverty, like not having rights, like not having any voice at work, like not having any social protection, a minimum of their likelihood to find themselves in this situation is twice as high as for the adults.
Okay, that's quite considerable. I also wanted to ask you about what is decent work, because we often talk about this word, decent work, decent jobs. Could you explain what is a decent job?
Well, when I try to explain this concept to a wider audience, I just think, what would I want for my children? I would want that they earn enough to, at the minimum, not have to live in poverty. So a decent earning comes with a decent job. But I would also like them to be protected, because you never know what happens. So I want a decent job to also protect my child. I also want them to have a voice at work, because especially young people, they have so much to contribute, so much to say, and they need to defend themselves and their rights. So it's very important that they have this, and this is also part of a decent job. And they also need to have some basic rights. You cannot let them work in terrible conditions. So if you have these 4 components, a good wage, social protection, a voice at work, and a respect for labor standards, that's what the ILO would call a decent job.
Okay. So I'll bring you in now, Felix. Yeah. So we've heard what is a decent job, what is decent work. So could you please explain what stands between youth and obtaining a decent job?
Thanks, Rina. Yeah, what stands between youth and decent jobs? There are many factors that come in. Some Dorothea had already alluded to. Of course, there are socioeconomic conditions, and also the level of education plays a role. To what level young people have access to resources. Also, what are the cultural norms in the society and then the context that you're living in. But at the ILO, what matters to us is also what young people think, how do they see the challenges they face on a daily basis. So the ILO recently conducted a survey with more than 2,000 young people worldwide and asked them what is the challenge they see and what are the aspirations they have for the future of work. And more than 40% of them actually say that having the professional experience that employers ask from them today, getting that experience, they find it very difficult. Another aspect they find challenging is actually that for many jobs today, you seem to need to have the right connection. And that's challenging for them. So clearly there is a gap between the aspirations that young people have and what's in it for them in the labor market today. So for the ILO, it's clearly beyond those two elements. Some elements Dorothea already mentioned. Even once you're employed, there are many challenges out there. Many young people out there, they are underemployed, they are in working poverty, or just the working conditions are so poor that they wouldn't qualify as a decent job.
Thank you. I'm also interested in how the data is different for men and women, and also in terms of regionally and demographics. So could you give us some insight on this? Is there much of a difference between unemployment between young men and young women, and also regionally?
As a matter of fact, again, in almost all indicators that we have to measure participation of young people in the labor market, women are doing much poorer than men. And this is even worse for young women. It gets worse when, for example, you live in the region of Middle East and North Africa. There, the unemployment rates of young women are double as high as the ones for young men, and they are already 10 times higher than for adults. So there you really have a huge challenge. It's also, it starts very early that in most parts of the world, girls don't get the same education. They cannot develop the same skills, which is already setting them off on a bad start in terms of labor markets. In many regions, they don't have the same rights as men have. When it comes to poverty, it's especially Africa and Asia, where the risk of being poor and work is much higher for young women than it is for young men. So if you want to summarize, being a young woman is literally the worst you can have if you want to get a decent job.
Okay. Thank you for that. We have a question that's come in from the audience, from Ashalita, and I'll direct this to both of you. What can employers do to promote youth employment? And who would like to go first for this one?
I can take a
Sure.
first step. I think employers play a crucial role in that dialogue between what constitutes a decent job. Their employers are a key actor to define that. So along with the workers and the government, they're in a position to define what is available to young people in the labor market. They play a key role in actually determining what type of and what level of skills should young people have. So employers can have a strong say, especially when it comes to education and training, what are the skills that are needed for a growing economy.
Okay, thank you for that. We also have another question from Saeed. How does the ILO work to promote decent job opportunities for youth? If you'd like, you could also answer some of Ashalita's question about employers, but I'll put that question to you.
Okay, let me start with the first question. The thing is, if you want to do something to really create and have decent jobs for young people, you really need to act in an integrated manner. It doesn't help if you just do one little project here and you help 10 people to enter the labor market. It really needs much more than that. In 2012, the ILO, and when I talk about the ILO, I talk about an organization that is very unique because it's workers, employers and governments together, came up with a document which is called the Call for Action on Youth Employment. And that's a key document. And there you find everything that we together, employers, workers, and governments, together with the ILO, have to do to actually really make a difference for young people. And one of the main messages is really only work in an integrated way. What does it help if we get the best skills you can imagine for young people, but there are no jobs? What does it help if there are millions of jobs, but there are no young people with the skills? And what if the two don't find one another. There is a skilled person, there is a good job, but they just don't know how to connect. That's the function of labor market institutions. You really have to have an integrated approach working at all these levels to make sure that things actually happen and sustain.
Thank you. I would like to remind the audience that you can be sending your questions. We're live right now, so we'd appreciate any of your questions you have on this topic of the Youth Employment Challenge. Thank you. We have a question from Anders, and the question is, are there any countries, not rich ones, that are good examples for creating jobs for youth? Who would like to take this question?
Well, maybe sorry to do exactly what you are asking me not to do. I will talk about two rich countries, and I explain in a second why. Traditionally, there are two countries in the world where youth unemployment is always more or less at the same height as adult unemployment, and that's Germany and Switzerland, and well, Switzerland to a certain extent, and Austria. Now, the reason why I say this, it's a conscious decision. There were times that were economically very difficult, but the government and workers and employers said, even at difficult times, we want young people not to suffer more than adult people. And there were policies in place that ensured that. So what I'm saying, why I'm saying this is it needs a conscious decision. Now, looking back like 20 years ago and looking what we have now, I don't think there is a single government in a developing country that would not stress that youth is the most important issue, and they would really focus their employment policies around youth, around what can be done for young people, around their skills development, their education. And yes, we do have many good examples, but again, the good examples are always at places where there is a dialogue, where the young people say what they need, where the employers say what they need, and where governments listen. And this is what you really have to have, because very often we assume we know, but we don't know what the others are thinking and what can be done.
That's true. Dialogue is very important. Another question I would like to discuss, there are lots of fears for young people about the future, if their jobs will still be there in the future. Mm-hmm. Will machines replace their jobs? So I would like to ask you, Felix, what are the industries that are going to be most impacted by this change and technology, and which industries are the jobs of the future going to be in?
Thanks, Rina. I think it's important to understand that what's at the core of those changes in terms of what changes are going to be there in the future, and that's changing nature of the world of work that we are seeing, and it's changing at a rapid pace, both in high-income countries and in middle-income countries. The pace is quite different, and it has different implications for high-income countries and low middle-income countries. But what we see is that the jobs we have today might not be exactly the type of jobs we have tomorrow. So what is essential here is not in that conversation also not only to look at the exact type of job or the industry, but also how does this ongoing process change how we see work itself in our society, and what's the value of work if, what do you say, machines are coming in and robotics and artificial intelligence. I think from an ILO perspective, we should also note that that does not apply to all young people currently in the world. There are many contexts in the world where young people will not be affected immediately by those trends. Nevertheless, it's important that the workforce continues to adapt to those trends, which will evolve. What I see here is that technology that you mentioned, whether it's machine or automation in general, is one of those mega trends, along with globalization, climate change, and of course demographic changes, which also affect how many young people we will actually have in the future and how many old people to be taken care of. I think for young people to adapt in any industry, it's important that we focus on investing in skills development and in lifelong learning to be able to adapt to a different industry. And that said, it comes with opportunities and challenges. And I think it is really also a policy decision to shape that future of work. That's exactly the reason why the ILO has established the Global Commission on the Future of Work to define what it means to have a decent job in the future. Just to mention one concrete example, how we're taking this forward is actually In the area of technology, we see digital skills as quite relevant. Not only the very advanced digital skills that you need to code, but also the basic ones, how to use a computer. So it is therefore one of the thematic priorities of the global initiative on decent jobs for youth that is led by the ILO. And it was last year that we've, together with the International Telecommunication Union, have launched a global campaign to equip 5 million young people with digital skills by 2030. We're now mobilizing many international partners from the private sector, from governments, to come together and to fulfill this pledge and go beyond it.
Thank you. The next question is regarding some ILO data on the topic. So early school leaving school early goes hand in hand with poverty, according to this data. So could you explain why this research is significant and why the ILO is doing research on this topic?
Thanks. It's very important research because it shows a phenomenon in a way that over the past years we have seen globally an increase in school enrollment, which is a very positive sign. But at the same time, you see many young people in low-income countries dropping out of school simply because sometimes they have to take up a job and cannot attend school anymore. So the research that we've done actually shows that this has serious implications for the future because they will not, to that extent, they are not able to fully explore their potential, maybe also to live up to maybe the dreams and aspirations they have. So it has implications on the educational level and for future employment. And what the research shows is that these early education deficits, if you want to call it that way, not able to fully to complete education, have serious implications. So once you start in a lower paid, maybe low skilled job environment, chances are that you are very likely to stay in those environments, and it becomes very difficult in the future to move out of those contexts. And clearly those are also linked to often also to poor working conditions and also to poverty itself.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to once again remind the audience to keep sending their questions. We have a question from Christiane, and she says, in my country, many young migrants are working in precarious conditions. Does the ILO have a policy to protect these young people and young migrants?
This is one of the areas where in the recent past the ILO has done a lot of work. It's in discussion as we speak here. It's one of the major topics that we keep discussing at our governing bodies and within the ILO. We still have a long way to go when it comes to labor standards and rights for migrant workers, but we are working on it. And this, of course, is particularly relevant for young people because actually the far majority of migrant workers are young people. They take the risk, they migrate, they try to find a job opportunity somewhere else, and we completely agree that it's the most important thing to actually protect them very well, especially because sometimes migration has this notion of people running away from their country because they don't have an alternative. But as a matter of fact, very often it's also the case that other countries need the migrant workers because they don't have enough young people for themselves. So it's very important, and yes, it's one of the major topics the ILO discusses these days.
So I want to pick on this topic of the transition from studies to work. So when young people are lucky enough to be able to complete their studies, then there's the difficulty and the transition from being a student to finding a stable job. So what advice could you give to young people about improving their chances?
Yeah, we see from our research at the ILO that often this transition from school to work becomes very difficult and often lengthy, and some of those reasons have already been mentioned, but it's clearly not an easy path. So what the ILO has done, we've actually accompanied young people through a longitudinal survey of how their employment develops and when they're unemployed and how it affects them. So this has been conducted in more than 30 countries, and what we see from this research is that at an individual level, young people who are pursuing higher education or making sure that they continue education and they're building up market relevant skills. And by market relevant skills, I mean the type of skills that are actually demanded by employers that make you employable. They have better chances of transitioning into a decent job at an earlier stage. So they're increasing their employability, if you want. And the second aspect that comes out of the school to work transition survey is that young people combine work and study, they're also more likely to have a shorter transition to a decent job. And I think many countries also that the ILO is working with have taken up those good practices that are out there on how to combine work and study for young people. Of course, if you talk about an individual level and advice, we can go beyond those findings, and it's important for young people to know where they could find information and access information that is relevant for them. I think clearly a lot of the ILO constituents, like the public employment services, they come in as a key partner to help young people in that aspect. But beyond that, also families or the peers of young people, the community network has a role to play in that aspect.
Okay. Picking up on this last comment that you made, could you go a bit further into saying how society in general can help young people who are about to enter the workforce? And I can put that to both of you if you want.
I think what comes out of the discussion so far is already that youth employment itself is a very complex challenge. It's not a challenge that can be addressed by one single actor in the system, not by governments alone, but not by the employers alone, not by workers alone, not by the ILO alone, or not by the youth themselves alone. It requires all of society to come together and also to forge partnerships, because together we can do more than as individuals. So it was actually in that spirit that the ILO also established a global initiative on decent jobs for youth that is currently being led by the ILO together with more than 20 other UN entities, and is for us the global initiative under the 2030 agenda to scale up country-level action on youth employment across key thematic priorities. So from green jobs for youth to supporting youth in fragile situations. But coming back to some of those concrete examples, what some of the actors could do to support young people in society. If you take governments, the ILO 2012 call for action lays out a very concrete framework of what has proven effective in supporting young people. So governments have a range of measures available. What is important is that it's an integrated manner. So ranging from labor market policies to support strengthening the employability of young people, to ensuring that they have the right rights and work available to them. So these are all important. And specifically, I think going more into detail here, one of those examples are these active labor market policies that I just mentioned. And these are often programs that help young people either to enter or to enter again into the labor market. Let's say a skills training intervention. And these often yield very large economic and social impacts when they're actually targeted at the most vulnerable and disadvantaged group of young people.
So we have a couple of questions that have come from the audience. So firstly, we have one from Carol, and she says, in Tanzania, 44% of the population are under 20 years old. Is there sustainable ways to ensure enough employment opportunities for young people in Tanzania? You could also give some examples of your work in Egypt. Thank you.
Well, that's what I said before. The thing is, the answer to this question is not we give the right skills to all the people, to all the young people, and then they will find a job. No, we also have to work with the governments and with the private sector to actually create those jobs. So that's a very important thing. Again, it can only happen if we really work together, and we have seen that it can work even in very youthful populations. We know that in the future, Africa will actually be the only continent with an increasing population, meaning with more and more young people. So especially in Africa, we have to focus on this group because it will be the issue for the long run. And if we don't solve the youth employment issues, we are not going to solve the poverty issues that we have in developing countries in Africa. That's very, very important. There are solutions, and as I said earlier, the interesting thing is all governments, especially governments in Africa, have become very active. Tanzania is one of the countries we work with literally on a daily basis to develop their policies, to actually do little things, but also do big things to really change the situation. And I just mentioned little things, and Felix was talking about active labor market policies. Just to give you one little example, we had a tiny little project in Egypt, and you asked me to talk about my experience in Egypt. And this little project was done with a handful of more or less non-functioning public employment services. And what we did is we organized job fairs. And every single time we organized a job fair, on average between 1,000 and 2,000 people, after just one day, had a job. And I'm not saying all of them stayed in their job. I'm not saying all of them got an excellent job. But for many of them, it was the first job. And for many of them, it gave them back hope that there are jobs, that we can do something together. And another little thing that we often do, sometimes what it needs for young people is just a bit of boost of their self-consciousness, to realize how important they are, what creative potential they have. And this is what we do with little programs. We train young people on these issues, we show them how important they are, and then they take self-initiative. And that's a very important point. Young people, especially in Africa, they cannot just wait and see that governments give them a job. It's not working, unfortunately. They really also have to take initiatives, they have to use their creative potential, they have to use the fact that they are less risk averse than adults, and very often things can happen then. But it needs efforts from all sides.
Thank you. So we have a question from Sandra, and it's about apprenticeships. So she asks, what about apprenticeships? Why aren't more countries taking up this as a way forward to get young people into work, gaining skills that employers need? Would you like to talk about that, Felix?
I can start.
Sure.
Well, thanks for the question, Sandra. I think it's a great question, and apprenticeships have proven in many countries to work very well in managing that transition for young people from school to work. So the question is, why haven't other countries taken up it to the same level? I think the truth is that many countries are actually doing so right now as we speak. So it's one of those priorities for the ILO under the Global Initiative on Decent Jobs for Youth. We call it actually quality apprenticeships because we pay particular attention to the quality aspects that relate to the work of young people in this regard. I think the aspect that we should keep in mind that this is not a standalone quick intervention. This is quality apprenticeships require the buy-in from the governments, from the private sector. It's an investment from their side as well. And we see it as a very positive sign that also the private sector itself, the employers, also in consultation with the social partners, come on board also, and they appreciate the added value of those learnings and the investment they make into young people. And that's the way forward to share those good practices.
Okay. And maybe if I just can add to this. Apprenticeships have always been a good policy for labor markets to activate and give young people the right skills. The problem is, for the longest time, we thought that using the best practices that we have developed in developed countries would work in developing contexts, and that's just not the case. They don't have the institutions, they don't have the mechanisms to actually have this dialogue. They don't have even the simple things to come together, the means to come together and to talk to one another. So just trying to take what you have in one country and works in one country to another country is literally about to fail. This is why more and more we have South-South cooperation projects where actually countries in similar situations can learn from one another, can help one another, can say what works and say what doesn't work, which is very important. And I think through this dialogue we have really learned a lot about There is no one-size-fits-all solution, not for apprenticeship and not for any other mean that we can actually use to improve the situation of young people.
Okay. So we have another question from William, and he's asking, what role does social protection play in addressing the youth unemployment challenge? Would you like to answer this question? Or you, Dorothea?
Well, I can...
Yeah.
I start this time?
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, the thing is, if you don't have a system of social protection in place, you don't get people out of poverty for good. So what happens is they come into this very vicious circle. They find a job, they are out of poverty for a short period, they lose the job for whatever reason, they are in poverty again. While in poverty, they cannot invest in themselves, they cannot develop new skills, they just have to survive, literally. That's all they can do if they don't have social protection. So the next job that they will find might be even worse than the first job they had. And this just continues. So you need a system in place that ensures that you are not falling into poverty just because you don't have a job for the time being, that you can use this period to actually develop your skills, to have creative ideas, to do something that can help you further develop and not fall back. So this is one of the reasons why social protection, especially for young people, is really, really crucial, and it just has to come with a decent job.
Okay. For those who may not know, could you just explain this term, what social protection is?
Well, social protection is a very wide term, and when it comes to employment, for example, when we talk about social protection, we talk about systems of unemployment insurance, but social protection also entails health insurance. It can come in all different forms. Pension systems are part of the social security system. So it's a very wide concept, and it's anything related to somebody looking after you in terms of financial contributions at times when you need this help. And it's the community as a total taking care of you when you are in a situation where you just cannot live by what you earn.
Okay, thank you. So we have one more question which we can ask, and I'll direct it to both of you.
Okay.
So what would you want young people who are watching this Facebook Live, what would you want them to walk away with? What do you think are the most important things that they need to know for their future and for entering the workforce? I'll put that to both of you, if you want to start.
Well, let me start from a ILO perspective first. I want you to know that the ILO really cares about you. We are an organization that is so unique with its tripartite structure, with workers, employers, and governments discussing the most difficult issues, trying to find solutions for very big challenges, including the youth employment challenge. So you're not alone. We are there to help you. We are there to find solutions you might not notice in your daily life, but be assured we are working on it. On a more personal level, just please try to use your creative potential. You have something to give to societies. You have a lot of energy, you have a lot of ideas, and that's what societies need to further develop. And just live your dream if you can.
Just to echo some of those words, but just to say for the ILO, it's been really a long-standing commitment to youth employment, and it remains a top priority for the ILO, but also across the UN system, to support youth and to work with and for youth on making decent jobs for youth a reality. It's not only the ILO and the UN system working on it, there are many other actors on it, also youth organizations and youth themselves. So what we want to say is also, the message I want to leave is that at the ILO itself, youth and youth organizations also have a voice and a seat at the table through the global initiative on decent jobs for youth.
Okay. Thank you to both of you for this very interesting discussion, and I would like to also thank the audience for listening to this discussion on the Youth Employment Challenge. Thank you.